Well, it's Sunday in South Carolina. We're going to get you connected to the Capitol this week with a discussion with that man, the State Treasurer Curtis Loftis, who has been the man of the hour for the better part of a year in this state amid that $1.8 billion money boondoggle. But we're going to let him discuss it himself. That is a big one this week on Connect to the Capitol, also joined by our friends Catherine Glenn Foster and Dave Wilson. Curtis Loftis is going to be able to express himself in his own words.
I'm so grateful for this, really, because we have been talking about the situation with the $1.8 billion, I believe, since our very first episode. And to be able to now speak to the man himself and hear directly from him about that whole backstory,
a big one.
How we got here, what went wrong, and what we need to do going forward. This is an opportunity that we just couldn't pass up.
Yeah, and just days before, he appealed to the state Supreme Court to say, wait a minute, can you look into this
That's right.
April 21st hearing that the Senate has set for my removal and see if it even meets constitutional muster? There's a lot of meat on the bone here.
There's a lot of meat on the bone. This goes back to the Constitution of South Carolina that was rewritten in 1895, and this has not happened but maybe once since then. And so you've got precedent that is being set here, and I think to his point, as he has said off air, this is a time where everybody who is in elected office in South Carolina needs to start asking themselves this question: do you want to be called before the Senate the same way that they're getting ready to call me? And that's going to be a real interesting motion to see if that actually gets through, if the Supreme Court decides that this doesn't need to take place, or it does. But I think very much so the Supreme Court is probably going to lean in favor of the Senate because, keep in mind, judges are elected by the legislature
by the lawmakers.
South Carolina.
Yeah, that's it, which is a whole show unto itself.
We've also talked about that.
Yeah, we will again.
Yes, we certainly
I know we will again throughout the course of the year. Another thing we've talked about, too, is the ongoing debate over insurance reform, liquor liability reform, tort reform, the whole conversation. We're still there. That's not settled yet. The House has their plan. The Senate has their plan. They passed. They're drastically different. But we're going to talk about that again this week.
Dual bills going on between the House and the Senate. Representative Gilgatch will be joining us to have a discussion to see what it's like from the House's perspective. We've heard from Senator Michael Johnson several weeks ago as they were in the midst of this tort reform, insurance liability. It's a fiasco in and of itself. But you've got two very different approaches. And I think what you'll hear from Gilgatch is probably going to be something a little different than what we've been hearing from the Senate.
I believe so. And that one's so important because it affects places that we do business with. The locally owned restaurants, bars that sometimes can't afford this insurance anymore.
That's exactly right. Sometimes it is so overwhelmingly priced that these places just shut down. And so when we go out for dinner, when we go to pick up something just from the local store, sometimes we find that they've been closed. Our favorite restaurant, gone. And often that may be because of these liquor liability laws.
One other topic we're going to hit on this week: taxes. Different kind of taxes, though. Not tax reform. Well, in a way, tax reform, but not the income tax reform plan we've just discussed in the past few weeks. Boat taxes. We've touched on this one before on this program. They are drastically inflated when it comes to other states. And again, that's another effort that's just kind of stalled in the water right now.
It is. You've got taxes in South Carolina on boat property taxes that are sometimes 3 times higher than you see in neighboring counties. They're looking at 2 different bills. We had a conversation earlier this week, if you caught it on our Connect to the Capitol Extra, that came out earlier this week with Representative Gary Brewer and Senator Stephen Goldfinch, who are looking at ways to bring down these boat taxes for the average person who, this is their entertainment for their family. This is not like a big luxury item, but it is drastically more than it is in other states. And people are moving their boats to other states, and South Carolina is losing tax revenue over this.
We are losing. That can't happen. So a lot to talk about this week, like every week. And it's going to be some very informative stuff as we get you connected to the Capitol. Well, as promised in our open today, a man that has been no stranger to the headlines, Curtis Loftis, the state treasurer, someone we have talked about on this program many times in recent weeks, and just recently filed with the state Supreme Court to have them review whether a Senate hearing that has been called can even move forward. set for April 21st, where they could potentially call for his removal from office over a $1.8 billion accounting issue. Who better to talk to us about that than the man himself, though? The State Treasurer, Curtis Loftis. Catherine, agreeing to spend some time with us on this Sunday.
Absolutely. Mr. Treasurer, you have described the recent calls for your removal as political retaliation. Can you just walk us through what's happened that has escalated to this point?
Well, it's about 14 years in the coming. I was elected, I've forgotten a lot of this. People bring it up now, with the Tea Party. And I wasn't all that much of a Tea Party guy because I wasn't all that active, but I came into that movement and I was just dead set to call out fraud, waste, and abuse. And I found it in a lot of places. And every time I called it out, I made enemies inside the State House, but I made fans outside the State House. And it's been a long time coming. I've been chased. I think I'm the most investigated guy in South Carolina government history. I could go down a long list, but we don't have time. And this is just another time. And this is particularly, I'd say vicious maybe, but it's really something.
Yeah. The $1.8 billion I referenced, we have talked it to death. You have been grilled for hours upon hours about this. A number of state officials have been. We've made clear it never was real money. But you have stood your ground on this and continue to do so.
That's right. It's an accounting entry from 8 years ago. I never knew a thing about it. Nobody's ever been able to prove that. It doesn't bother the Treasurer's office because it's in the comptroller's books. And his books are, say, this big. I'm the bank, and we manage about $45 billion a night. That's with a B. And we're here, and then they're here because they include the Ports Authority, they include universities, things that we don't really do much with. So, and they have real money and then not real money, budget dollars. We only have cash. And it's like your bank. You know what your cash you have. And if you have a problem, you can pick up the phone and call. Well, you can imagine if we call, if we had $50 billion, $45 billion, we get a lot of service. So we knew always how much cash there was. We just didn't know where it was in his books because that's not my job.
Let's talk transparency and accountability. What do you think the public deserves to know about this $1.8 billion, and what do you think should have been done?
The first thing, if you want transparency and accountability, when I go into a hearing, I have to raise my hand and I have to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I think the Senate should have to do the same thing. Now, not only do they not say an oath, they have immunity. They can slander and libel me and not get in trouble. There's nothing I can do about it. So am I saying that they're dastardly characters? No. But they can make a political argument, and I'm making a legal argument because I can be held responsible. Not only do I have to take an oath, I have responsibilities to the federal government, the bondholders. There's a lot of things that the Treasurer does. The legislative branch doesn't understand the power, or maybe they do understand, the power they have with that immunity. We have given them information that should be included in these reports that show we didn't do this. They refuse to include it. They don't have to. They don't say, I'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. They just don't put that information in. So we look forward to a hearing. The problem is this hearing effectively has no rules. Nobody's sworn in at this last hearing except for we're on the Senate floor, so they have immunity. Again, they can say whatever they want. They can present whatever they want, and there's no responsibility. But I'm a regular person. I go in there, I can still be held, even though I don't swear, I can still be held for what I say, held accountable. So we got to have a level playing field. If they can do this to the Treasurer, they can do it to a Supreme Court justice. They can do it to a solicitor. They can do it to a circuit court judge. So can you imagine a Supreme Court justice who makes a bad ruling? They get mad at him, they haul him in for a year and a half and treat him like this? It's chaos. So it's a power grab by one branch of the General Assembly, which is the Senate. The House is firm. They say we understand elections matter. The people have spoken, and we've seen no reason to get involved. And the governor says the same thing. So my problem is the Senate.
As of now, April 21st is that day. We'll see what the High Court, of course, has to say about that. And but the train keeps chugging for you. A week ago, you announced you're going to run again.
That's right.
You were telling me before we sat down, you thought you were going to call it a day and maybe retire after this term, but that's not the case right now.
That's right. I was going to retire, but you swear an oath. And both my parents died in the last couple of years. My dad would roll over in his grave if he knew that when I was needed most to protect the money of the state, that I retired. I just can't. And the Senate wants to control it. A handful of senators, not the whole Senate, the subcommittee, a handful of powerful senators, they want to have control. They want to appoint the treasurer. That way they get to decide who invested, who are the lawyers, the consultants, who are the underwriters. It's a lot of money that goes out the door in these fees. I cut the fees low. So I'm sure some people aren't happy about that. It might be in the background here. But you could easily bring those fees back up. And who pays them? The taxpayer. And I'm talking tens of millions of dollars per year, not including the actual profit the investors make off the money. So it's important that we keep our money for our benefit, not the benefit of a few people.
The fact that this hearing has even been called is a piece of history in this state. So we're going to see what's going to happen here in the days and weeks ahead. We're going to continue this conversation much more in depth in a Connect to the Capitol Extra. We're just so grateful that you came to spend some time with us. I know we've been trying to get in here for a few weeks, and we got you. So we're going to get you for a few more minutes in that Connect to the Capitol Extra on WACH.com. Thank you again, sir. All right, moving to our next topic. Dueling insurance reform plans at the State House. One in the House, one in the Senate. The one in the House specifically geared towards liquor liability insurance, the more focused plan as opposed to the omnibus bill in the
because the
Senate.
The Senate took on a much broader look at the issue
one way of putting it.
One way of talking about that, a much broader issue of taking a look at the insurance reforms that need to take place. But the thing that has now put us where we are is you've got two competing things that are specifically dealing with how liquor liability issues are dealt with. The House dealt with it very directly. The Senate started to take a much more comprehensive look, and that's what brings us to today, because now we've got two different bills in two different chambers. They've switched back over now. So the question is, what will the House do with the Senate version? What will the Senate do with the House version? Joining us to discuss that, Representative Gil Gatch, from the South Carolina House of Representatives. Representative, thanks so much for joining us here on Connect to the Capitol this Sunday morning.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's so good to be with you guys today.
When we start looking at the two different bills that have now made their way through their respective chambers, you were very, very vocal about the issues that were going on liquor liability, and the House of Representatives dealt with the issues very swiftly and very succinctly. How is what you're doing in the House different than what happened in the Senate?
I mean, I can't imagine there being any more differences than there are. I mean, we dealt with it succinctly. I mean, we dealt with it head on. The thing that everybody was concerned about was the liquor liability, the alcohol exception to joint and several liability. That was the problem. Insurance companies are saying, we're raising your rates, we're raising your rates. And the reason why is because of this joint and several liability problem South Carolina has with the alcohol exception. Well, guess what? The House dealt with it. We dealt with it in a few hours. We dealt with it in a few hours unanimously. Unanimously. How many issues are voted in favor of unanimously? Not one single vote on the red side. Nobody voted no. But the Senate went on for weeks. I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. And not only did it go on forever, it's so complicated, guys. I mean, what is it about joint and several liability and liquor liability that's so complicated that the Senate has to take a month to get to it? And then finally, when they get it out, it's even more complicated than we began. So I think that we just really need to educate our people to understand what is really going on with the Senate's bill versus the House bill. And I hope people will really look at the House bill and ask their senators to support the House bill, because they right now are refusing to take it up.
They passed their plan, or you passed your plan in the House as they were, I think, in week number two of their debate in the Senate. And I recall the day that the House passed that plan, you already were gaining support from certain senators in that chamber that's saying, hey, why don't we just make this simple, guys, and let's do this? Because here's what's at stake. We've talked about this for months. It's the locally owned business. It's our favorite restaurants that are affected by this, that are choosing not to be in business anymore because they can't afford it.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. You know, I just had a phone call as a lawyer with an insurance adjuster, and we have $31,000 in actual damages. They refuse to pay the actual damages. And I asked the guy, I said, just as man to man, what is it about insurance is so complicated that we require people to pay these premiums, but when there's actual real problems, real damages, real hurt people at the end of this wreck or whatever it is, that you guys refuse to pay out for the actual damages? And he couldn't give me an answer. The Senate bill is to help the insurance companies not have to pay people who are injured, like the Emma Longstreets from 2012. The people who are devastated by catastrophic injury, the Senate bill makes it so complicated. And if I could just say one thing that makes it really, really complicated, there's so many things. But when you go in front of a jury, you've got a plaintiff and a defendant, right? The plaintiff is the person who's been hurt. Their family member's been killed, or they've lost a limb, or they've been just catastrophically injured in some way. They're the plaintiff. Well, the defendant with the Senate's bill can add all of these different parties. They can point to this Chinese corporation that's some unknown entity, or they can point to this person who's in jail, who has no money, and they can go before the jury and make a case without that person being even in the courtroom to try to make them have the blame. Say, hey, jury, this person over in China or this person in jail, we want them to be on the hook. The jury doesn't know that those folks have absolutely no obligation to pay at all. The law doesn't make it required that the jury knows that if they assign blame to this other person, they're not required to pay. It's a sneaky tactic. And so what ends up happening is if the jury is convinced by this defense attorney who works for the insurance company that Chinese corporation or person who's in jail is at fault, the person who's been injured, that plaintiff, doesn't get the money. There's no obligation for them to get paid. Who does it help? It certainly doesn't help the injured person. It only helps the insurance companies. And they make it so complicated where conversations like this, it's really kind of hard to follow sometimes. And that's another tactic. They want it to be hard to understand so they can just roll their eyes and somebody can say, oh, that's just a plaintiff's attorney who wants to get money. That's the only reason why they're against it, because they're going to lose money. No. I'm against this because it hurts the moms and dads and the kids who are injured by people at no fault of their own. That's who we have to stand up for, that's who I stand up for.
So when we look
I
at
hope that
something
we
like
can
this,
get people to call their senators to support the House bill, because that's the one that directly takes care of the issue that everybody was upset about. It takes care of the alcohol exception for joint and several liability. Let's go.
So when we look at this particular issue, then, Representative, this is the one that impacts what goes on in your local restaurants, your local VFWs, your local bars, because they're having to pay exorbitant rates. What does your bill specifically do to address that issue?
So there are a couple of ways that the House bill addresses that issue. It allows, first of all, it takes care of, like I said before, the alcohol exception to joint and several liability, meaning that, just because you serve alcohol doesn't mean you're going to be on the hook for 100% of the damages. So that's the first huge step. That's the one that everybody wanted. The obvious fix. We did that. But also, if you're a bar or you're in a restaurant and you close before a certain time at night, let's say you close at 8 or 9 o'clock, and you give your training, your staff to the certain kind of training that is required, that there's no big fee or anything for the training, then you can get a reduced rate in your premium. So there's all sorts of ways that you as a restaurant owner, that you can get a reduced rate, a promised reduced rate from your insurance carrier. Now, if you're like a strip club or something that's up until the middle of the night, with all the craziness, now maybe you have a harder time with your premiums. But for folks who are just doing normal business, like restaurant owners and bar owners who close at a reasonable time and give training, you guys are good. The other thing that we did is we increased the penalties for DUIs to disincentivize drunk driving. So we decided to take an approach on both sides of this. And like I said before, we got it done in a few hours. We got it done unanimously. The Senate has refused to take it up. Even like you said, there are senators like Senator Goldfinch who are like, let's go, let's do this. The House have already done this. Let's take this up. And unfortunately, Senate Majority Leader Massey has just said no. I think that that's a short-sighted approach on his part. I wish he would take it up. And I'd ask the people who can give him a call, the people who are listening, give him a call so that he will be more inclined to take up the bill that we've already done. All he has to do is say yes, and then it's going to be signed into law. We can get this insurance problem fixed right now.
All right, there is a battle that certainly looms ahead. That is for sure here. But we have a passionate warrior on one side.
We absolutely do, and the dueling will continue on. We'll keep you up to date at everything that's going on. Representative Gilgatch, thanks so much for taking the time to join us this morning to really help people to understand what's going on, and we'll keep you informed on the goings-on of the rest of this debate right here on Connect to the Capitol.
Thank you, guys.
All right, right now we're going to revisit a topic that we talked about 3-4 weeks ago here. We're talking taxes when it comes to boats in the state of South Carolina. Our tax rate on boats, in a word, is astronomical when compared to other states, particularly in our region, but almost anywhere, for that matter, when you look at the statistics.
When you look at it, boat taxes in South Carolina tend to be anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 times higher than counties in our neighboring states. And that's why we bring in today Senator Stephen Goldfinch and Representative Gary Brewer to talk about what can be done on this. You both have bills that are in each of your respective chambers to begin to address this issue and to cut property taxes on boats by 50%. We had Geddes Brandon from the South Carolina Boating and Fishing Alliance in 3 or 4 weeks ago, thinking that maybe this is going to be moving forward, but I feel like the anchor has been dropped and we are going nowhere right now.
Yeah, I like the metaphor. No, I think that's accurate. I think it's time to just start taking an axe to it. As you said, I mean, 300% higher on states all around us, but it's more than that. We're also being double taxed in many, many counties, as you probably have heard. You're oftentimes taxed for your boat, for your motors, and for your trailer, which you're not supposed to be taxed for the trailer in South Carolina. And then they actually tax you as a whole for the package. And so you're double taxed. You're also taxed, higher than you are surrounding counties. We had this bill up in the subcommittee in the Senate. I know that Representative Brewer had his up too, but we had this bill up in the Senate. And I asked a very simple question, Dave. I said, do you understand fundamental economics? When you reduce taxes on something, you grow the economy. You grow that sector, which is exactly what we want to do here. We want to grow the boating sector. We want to open up opportunities for folks. We want to grow the boat manufacturing sector in South Carolina. It's a very simple formula. If you've got the highest taxes in the nation, I move my boat to a lower tax county or to a lower tax state right next door. Horry County, it's real easy. You just pop it right across the door in North Carolina and you save $2,000, $3,000, $4,000.
And that's easy for some people who are able to do that because they can move their boats back and forth. But if you're in some of these other counties across the state, or you just have a very simple John boat that you've got to be able to then go to some other state, that's an absolute nightmare for some folks.
Well, I'll tell you, at the very basis of this, 10.5% boat taxes is just too high. Your cars are at 6%. What people keep on telling us over and over again, hey, these are luxury items. These are items that you don't need. Well, I'll argue the fact that many of my constituents down in Charleston, this is their vacations. This is what they do to spend time with their families. This is where they get to spend most of their free time, being able to be on their boat and enjoy life, being in the low country. And the fact of the matter that we have to charge these people double, triple where they could be in other places charging 3 times as less, it's a big problem for us, And I tell you, we've been through, like Senator Goldfinch said, we've been through over and over again. They've been double taxing us on the motors. They've been adding trailer values in there, and it's not fair to our people. And there's hundreds of thousands of boat owners in South Carolina that need help all over the state, not just on the coast.
We got some of the statistics that you're talking about. We drew up a graphic, Dylan, if you could show that quickly. But we're in the peak of boating season now, and look at that. Look at the comparison here. When we look at that map, how did we even get here to this point? When, as we've said, all you got to do is move it over the state line.
That's right.
How did we get to this point to drive people away?
Yeah, well, not only do you not have to just move it over the state line, you have a number of people, and I know Senator Goldfinch, they're just not paying their taxes.
Sure.
Right? Sure. So there's a lot of people that are just not even worrying about paying their taxes. They'd rather pay the fine or pay the ticket because they're just going to get a ticket and we keep on moving. So we got here because we have not paid attention to what our people have been telling us. And our legislature, our people, we need to step up and we need to take care of our average citizen, and our average citizen owns a boat.
In this particular case, we're looking at an industry, Senator, as you were talking about a moment ago, a more than $6 billion industry. In South Carolina, the boating and fishing industry is huge.
Yeah.
We've got more boats produced in South Carolina than we have from manufacturers, than we have manufacturers of cars and tires combined.
Sure.
And when you look at that, how do you begin to grow that sector of the economy when you have a situation like this?
You don't. I think it's growing naturally despite our problems. But if we really were interested in growing that sector of the economy, we wouldn't be taxing it to death. Think about natural fundamental economics, okay? We're at 10.5%. If we cut it in half, how many people that are putting their boats, registering their boats in Delaware, registering their boats in Montana, that's a big thing nowadays. One-time registration fee, $700, no residency requirement, you're registered in Montana. Well, if you've got a $500,000 boat, which a lot of these big center consoles are nowadays, you're talking about $50,000+ in taxes in South Carolina in many cases. Why would I not just go register my boat in Montana for $700? Think about all those boats that are going to be coming back to South Carolina. They're going to be registering in South Carolina. They're going to be bringing those tax dollars back to South Carolina. And I would say to the counties, y'all, think with your heads for just a minute, not with those greedy hands that oftentimes the government tends to reach out and grab those pocketbooks from us. Think with your heads for just a minute. All of the boats, the big mega yachts, the big giant fishing boats, all of those boats that are going to be coming back to those counties, Georgetown County, Horry County, Charleston County, and all the tax dollars are going to be flooding in when those boats are no longer registered in Delaware or Montana or Georgia or Florida or North Carolina. It's going to be tremendous. It's going to be huge for South Carolina. It's not going to be a tax cut for those counties. It's not going to be a revenue cut for those counties. It's going to be a revenue boom for those counties. They just got to get on board and understand the fundamental economics of it.
And it's frustrating to hear. I've had Dorchester County as well too, and so we have Scouting boats, we have Key West, we have Pioneer, we have Sportsman boats. We have all these manufacturers in a big cluster right there. And you ask them, where does South Carolina rank in your markets? It's not even in their top 10 of markets because it's expensive to own a boat here. It's not expensive. It's expensive to buy a boat. It's expensive to own a boat here, and that's a problem.
And with all this talk of cutting taxes right now at the State House, this would seem like a no-brainer. We've been talking about a lot of those issues lately, the no-brainer. Dave is going to have a Connect to the Capitol Extra with them as well to go a little deeper into this one.
We're going to go deeper into it, but we're also going to talk about what it actually is going to take for you to get active on this issue so that bills that right now are anchored in the House and the Senate can actually be moving forward. So catch that at WACH.com.
I'm proud of the work we did to root out corruption in state government, but take it from me, someone who saw the rat's nest firsthand, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Bombshell of an announcement by longtime Solicitor David Pascoe, changing political parties this past week from Democrat to Republican, making that announcement at the Dorchester County GOP dinner just a few days ago. He's a name that is well known in South Carolina political circles. Some probably don't like to hear his name.
David Pascoe got a lot of reputation being a special prosecutor that was assigned a big political mayhem that had gone on. You had Richard Quinn and several other political consultants who were being investigated by the Attorney General, went through the grand jury. The Attorney General recused himself from that case and assigned that over to Pascoe, and Pascoe went at it hard. And it had a lot of rumbles in politics in South Carolina. To now see him moving into this position, with the Attorney General most likely looking to run for governor, I think what you're seeing right now is the shift of the items on the board, and it's very difficult in South Carolina to be elected to a constitutional office as a Democrat.
Yes, indeed it is. It's been quite a while that has happened. So,
It has.
Yes.
And I think we're seeing the writing on the wall. You mentioned the Attorney General. Dave had a very in-depth conversation with him about the hit and run case
Right.
that sadly killed a USC student, an undocumented migrant charged in that particular case. He is taking over the prosecution of that.
He is.
Very serious situation, and the AG now stepping into the prosecutor role in that.
Right. Now, this isn't what you would typically see
No.
for a hit and run. So again, we're kind of seeing some of the chess being played here with political parties and with this prosecution. Tragic situation, so we'll have to track that going forward.
Yeah, and we want to make sure that folks get a listen of that. Again, that is a Connect to the Capitol Extra, that about a 20-minute conversation we had with him.
We had a
So-
good lengthy conversation. We talked about not only the Attorney General's office taking over that case, but some of the other subsequent things that we're seeing when it takes the move of drug cartels coming into South
Yeah.
Carolina, the impact that they're having. And so there's a broader issue on the issue of undocumented immigrants that they're trying to take with that. He does a good job of explaining that from his perspective. And I would catch that on the Connect to the Capitol Extra, because you can get a much more in-depth understanding of where he's coming from and why they feel it's important for them to take on a hit and run case in South Carolina.
And
Because of- Go ahead.
And we do have an attorney general who's very focused on the bigger picture. He isn't looking at just the microcosm of each specific case, a hit and run, whatever it may be, but he is looking at the broad view, at the forest, not the trees, whether it comes to drug cartels or whether it's about how to prosecute some of these people targeting our children online. He's doing everything he can to address those broad issues and protect South Carolinians.
Yeah, it's a good interview, absolutely. 2 weeks in a row now he's come on, and we've had some good discussions with him. Before we get out of here, we got to look ahead to what we know is on tap this coming week. The Senate getting to they got to get to the budget. It's supposed to happen this week.
Right.
Because we cannot end the session without one.
Well, they did announce earlier this week that there are going to be no earmarks.
Okay.
So any of those special projects that used to be set aside, where senators and representatives would set certain monies aside for special projects, those are now coming out of the budget. We're hearing that saves up to $330 million. I heard that in a conversation just this past week. So this is a way of looking at cost savings about how do we cut the fat in the pork and barrel spending, so to speak, here, and really get down to the brass tacks of state government doing what state government's supposed to be doing.
Provide services to all of us.
Exactly.
In the most efficient and effective way.
Right.
Yes.
And hopefully we had an efficient and effective conversation this week with so many different people. We're glad to spend every Sunday with you here in South Carolina as we get you connected to the Capitol. We're going to do it again next week. As always, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for being here.